The young gunsmith held the rifle between two fingers like it was something he'd scraped off the bottom of his boot. "Sir, I'm not going to lie to you. This thing's a paperweight. The receiver's pitted, the op rod's frozen, and I wouldn't trust it to hold a door open, let alone fire a round." He slid it back across the glass counter with a little push, the way a man pushes away a plate of food that's gone bad. "Throw it in the scrap bin behind the shop. I'll even do it for you, save you the trip." The old man in the faded green jacket didn't answer. He just looked down at the rusted Garand, at the dirt still clinging to the wood, and then back up at the kid behind the counter. And if you believe that an old Marine and a 70-year-old rifle still have something left to prove, type the word "honor" in the comments before this story goes any further. His name was Raymond Delgado, and at 78 years old, he moved through the world the way an old oak moves in a storm, slow, deliberate, and harder to knock down than anyone ever gave him credit for. He lived alone in a small house at the end of a gravel road outside Beaumont, Texas, the kind of place where the mailbox leaned a little to the left and the porch light had been burning the same yellow bulb for 6 years. His wife, Eleanor, had passed in the spring of 2021, and since then Raymond had filled the quiet of the house with two things: his garden and his memories. The garden took up most of the backyard, neat rows of tomatoes and peppers and squash that he tended every morning before the sun got mean. The memories took up the rest of him. He walked with a slight limp in his right leg, a souvenir he called it, from a place he didn't like to name out loud, and he used a cane made of dark walnut that his grandson had carved for him the summer before last. His hands, though, were still strong, thick-knuckled, calloused along the sides from a lifetime of work, with a small pale scar running across the back of the left one that he never explained to anyone who asked. He wore the same faded olive field jacket most days, the kind with the little loops on the shoulders where a rank insignia used to be. And if you looked closely at the inside collar, you could just make out a name stenciled in black ink that had faded almost to nothing. But nobody ever looked that closely. People saw an old man in a worn-out coat and a limp and a cane, and they made up their minds about him before he'd even finished saying hello. Raymond had learned a long time ago not to correct them. What none of them knew, not the neighbours who waved at him from their driveways, not the checkout girl at the feed store, not the young man who was about to become the worst customer service story of his short career, was that the jacket Raymond wore every morning had once been issued to a Force Reconnaissance Marine, whose name still appeared on a classified commendation, locked in a filing cabinet at Quantico. It was on a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of morning where the air had finally turned cool enough to work in without sweating through your shirt, that Raymond's tiller hit something hard in the back row of his tomato patch. He felt the jolt travel up through the handles and into his shoulders, and he cut the engine and stood there a moment, listening to the tick of the cooling motor and the distant bark of a dog 2 properties over. He knelt down, pushed the loose dirt aside with the edge of his palm, and felt the cold, unmistakable shape of metal under his fingers. It took him almost 40 minutes to work it free. Whatever it was had been down there a long time, decades, maybe, wrapped in the roots of an old pecan stump that had been ground out before he'd ever bought the property. When he finally pulled it up and laid it across his knees, he let out a long breath that sounded almost like a laugh. It was a rifle. Not just any rifle. An M1 Garand, the stock rotted down to nothing, the metal black with corrosion, the barrel so pitted it looked like the surface of the moon. But the lines were unmistakable. The shape of it, the weight of it in his hands. Raymond sat there in the dirt of his own garden, a 78-year-old man holding a rifle older than he was, and something moved behind his eyes that hadn't moved in a very long time. He didn't know yet where that rifle had come from, or how it had ended up buried 6 feet from his tomato plants. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty, and it was the kind of certainty that only a man who had carried a Garand into places most people couldn't find on a map could ever have. This rifle wasn't scrap, and he was going to prove it. He just didn't know yet that the person who would try hardest to stop him from proving it was waiting for him behind the counter of a gun shop 14 miles down the road. Beaumont Firearms and Supply sat in a strip mall between a nail salon and a payday loan office, the kind of place with a neon open sign in the window and a bell on the door that rang a little too loud when you walked in. The kid behind the counter was 24 years old. His name was Tyler Brennan, and he had been working at the shop for about 11 months. Tyler wore a black polo with the store logo embroidered over his heart, and he had the kind of short beard young men grow when they want to look older than they are. He thought of himself as a gunsmith, though the extent of his training was a 6-week course at a trade school in Houston and a lot of YouTube videos watched at high speed. He was good at cleaning Glocks and decent at swapping out AR-15 uppers, and he knew enough about bolt-action deer rifles to sell them to men who knew less than he did. What he did not know much about, in any real and practical sense, was the M1 Garand. He had held exactly one in his entire life, at a gun show in Katy when he was 19, and the old man who'd been selling it had told him a story about Korea that he hadn't really listened to because he was looking at the price tag and thinking it was too much money for a rifle he couldn't put a red dot on. When the bell over the door rang that Tuesday afternoon and Raymond Delgado walked in with something long, wrapped in an old pillowcase under his arm, Tyler looked up from his phone with the bored half-smile he gave to every customer, over the age of 60, the one that said, "I'll be polite, but please don't take up too much of my day." "Afternoon, sir. What can I do for you?" Raymond set the bundle on the glass counter carefully, the way a man sets down something that matters to him. He unwrapped the pillowcase without saying a word, and the rusted length of the Garand emerged into the fluorescent light of the shop. The smell of old earth and older oil came with it. Tyler's nose wrinkled before he could stop it. He leaned forward, put his hands on the counter, and looked down at the rifle the way you'd look at a dead animal someone had dragged in off the highway. "Oh boy," he said. And then he said it again because he thought it was funny. "Oh boy. Sir, where did you find this?" "Garden," Raymond said. Just the one word. Tyler laughed, a short, surprised laugh that he didn't try very hard to hide. "Well, that explains a lot. You might want to plant it right back where it came from." He reached out and lifted the rifle by the barrel with the tips of his fingers, tilting it back and forth under the light, shaking his head slowly like a doctor who has seen the X-ray and knows the patient isn't going to make it. "Sir, I'm going to be straight with you. This is scrap. I mean it. The receiver's pitted all the way through, the barrel's gone, the op rod looks like it's been welded shut by rust, and I wouldn't put a live round anywhere near this thing. You're lucky it didn't blow your foot off just sitting in the ground." Raymond didn't answer. He was looking at the place on the receiver where Tyler's thumb was resting, and his jaw was doing something very slight and very quiet that Tyler didn't notice. "Honestly," Tyler went on, warming to his own expertise now, the way young men do when they think they're teaching something, "I'd throw it in the scrap bin out back. I'll even do it for you. Save you the trip to the dump. These old war rifles, man. I know they mean something to you guys, but this one's done. It's cooked. You want a rifle that actually works? I got some nice Ruger American models on the wall over there. Real accurate, real affordable, and they don't need a priest to bring them back from the dead." He laughed again at his own joke. Raymond still didn't laugh. He reached forward with one thick-knuckled hand and very gently took the rifle back from Tyler's grip. He wrapped it in the pillowcase again with the same careful deliberateness with which he'd unwrapped it, and then he looked up at Tyler, really looked at him, the way an older man looks at a younger one when he is measuring something the younger one cannot see. And he said, in a voice that was not angry but was somehow heavier than anger, "Thank you for your time, son." He turned toward the door. But before he reached it, an older customer standing by the ammunition shelf, a man in a Vietnam veteran's ball cap who had been watching the whole exchange in silence, caught Raymond's eye and gave him the smallest nod. Raymond nodded back, and as the bell rang again and Raymond stepped out into the afternoon sun, the Vietnam vet turned slowly toward Tyler, opened his mouth as if to say something, and then closed it again and just shook his head. Because some things, he knew, a man had to find out for himself. Raymond drove home with the rifle on the passenger seat of his old Ford Ranger, his hands steady on the wheel, the radio off. He did not think about what Tyler had said. He thought, instead, about a night in 1968 on a ridge above a valley whose name he had not spoken aloud in 56 years, and about a young corporal named Billy Hatcher from Tulsa, Oklahoma, who had handed him a Garand exactly like this one and said, "Sarge, if anything happens, you make sure this gets home." Billy had not come home. The rifle Billy had carried that night had been lost in the chaos that followed, reported missing in the after-action report, written off by a quartermaster in a building 3,000 miles away, who had never smelled cordite or cut banana leaves out of his boots. Raymond had carried the memory of Billy Hatcher for 56 years, the way some men carry a stone in their pocket, and he had never quite been able to put it down. He did not know yet whether the rifle on the seat beside him was the one Billy had handed him that night. It could not be. That was impossible. The math alone made it impossible. A Texas tomato patch was not a Vietnamese ridge, and geography did not bend that way for sentimental old men. But when he had held the rifle in his garden that morning and felt the weight of it in his hands, something in his chest had tightened the way it used to tighten when the platoon moved into the tree line, and Raymond Delgado had learned a long time ago to trust that tightening above any other voice in his head. When he got home, he did not go into the house. He went straight to the garage. The garage was a small wooden building behind the main house, with a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling and a workbench along the back wall that had belonged to Elena's father. On the pegboard above the bench, arranged with the quiet precision of a man who respects his tools, hung every wrench and punch and brass hammer Raymond had accumulated over a lifetime. In the bottom drawer of the bench, under a folded shop rag, was a small wooden case Raymond had not opened in almost 20 years. He opened it now. Inside were the tools of an armourer. Real tools, the kind the Marine Corps had taught him to use in a Quonset hut in Da Nang in 1967, the kind Tyler Brennan had never even seen a picture of. A combination tool for the Garand, a chamber brush, a set of pin punches in graduated sizes, a tin of lubriplate grease so old the label was cracked but the grease inside was still good. Raymond laid them out on the bench one by one, and his hands did not shake. And 300 miles to the north, in an office at Camp Mabry in Austin, a phone was about to ring on the desk of a man who had spent the last 19 years of his life wondering whatever had happened to the Marine Staff Sergeant who had dragged him off a ridge in 1968 and saved his life. Raymond worked through the afternoon and into the evening. He started with the stock, what was left of it, and removed the metal furniture with the patience of a man who has nowhere else to be. He laid each part out on a clean white towel in the order he removed it, the way he had been taught half a century ago by a gunnery sergeant named Polanski, whose voice he could still hear in his head on quiet nights. The trigger group came free with a gentle tap. The follower rod and operating rod spring came next. The barrel and receiver group, seized with rust and earth, resisted him the longest, and he did not force it. He soaked it in a shallow pan of penetrating oil and went inside to make himself a sandwich while it did its work. When he came back an hour later, the op rod moved under his thumb for the first time in God only knew how many years, and Raymond allowed himself the smallest smile. He degreased each part by hand in a coffee can of mineral spirits, working with an old toothbrush and a piece of wire wool, scrubbing away decades of corrosion the way a man scrubs grief off an old photograph. The metal underneath was not pretty. It would never be pretty again. But it was sound. He could see it now, could feel it under his fingers. The way the pitting on the outside of the receiver was cosmetic, surface damage, ugly, but not structural. The internal lugs, the bolt face, the chamber itself, all of them had been protected by the cosmoline and oil that some long-gone armourer had packed into this rifle before it had ever gone into the ground. Raymond shook his head slowly as he realised what he was looking at. Someone had prepared this rifle for long-term storage. Someone had known what they were doing. This wasn't a rifle that had been lost in a firefight and forgotten in the mud. This was a rifle that had been buried on purpose by hands that had loved it, in a place where those hands had expected someday to come back for it. He set the receiver down on the towel and stared at it for a long moment, and the question that had been sitting at the back of his mind all day finally stepped forward and made itself known. Who had buried it, and why in his garden? It was past 10 o'clock when Raymond finally found the serial number. He had cleaned the receiver enough by then to read the stamped digits on the heel, and he pulled a small notebook from the drawer of the workbench and wrote them down in the careful block letters of a man who had filled out too many forms in his life to be sloppy about it now. Then he sat down in the old metal chair by the bench and looked at the number for a long time. He did not recognise it. Of course he did not recognise it. He had never known the serial number of Billy Hatcher's rifle, and even if he had, he would not have remembered it after 56 years. But there was something about seeing the number written down in his own handwriting that made his hands, for the first time that day, tremble just slightly. He stood up, walked into the house, and picked up the phone on the kitchen wall. He dialed a number he had not dialed in almost 4 years, a number belonging to a man named Harlan Webb who lived in a retirement community outside San Antonio, and who had been, once upon a time, a clerk in the records office of the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. Harlan picked up on the 4th ring, his voice thin and a little confused the way old men's voices get when the phone rings after dark. "Harlan," Raymond said, "it's Ray Delgado." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a long one, and then Harlan said, very quietly, "Ray, my God, it's been years." I know. I'm sorry about that. Harlan, I need a favor. I know it's late, but I need you to look something up for me if you still have your contacts. What is it, Ray? Raymond looked down at the notebook in his hand. I need you to run a serial number on an M1 Garand for me, and I need you to tell me who it was issued to. Another pause, longer this time. Ray, Harlan said carefully, where did you get a serial number on a Garand? I dug it up in my tomato patch this morning. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long that Raymond almost thought Harlan had hung up. And then, in a voice that was suddenly very awake and very focused, Harlan said, Read me the number. Read it to me slowly. Raymond read it. Harlan made him read it twice. And then Harlan said, Ray, don't move. Don't touch that rifle again tonight. I'm going to make some calls. I'm going to call you back in the morning. Harlan, what? In the morning, Ray. And the line went dead. Raymond stood in his kitchen with the receiver in his hand and the sound of the dial tone humming against his ear, and for the first time in a very long time he felt the old familiar feeling of standing at the edge of something he did not yet understand. He walked back out to the garage. He looked at the rifle on the bench, the metal gleaming dully now in the light of the bare bulb, the pitted receiver and the cleaned bolt and the op rod he had worked free with his own hands. He did not go to bed that night. He sat in the metal chair beside the bench and he watched the rifle the way a man watches a sleeping child, and he waited for the sun to come up. At 5:47 in the morning, Raymond Delgado loaded an 8-round en-bloc clip of 30-06 into the Garand he had dug out of his garden less than 24 hours earlier, carried it out to the back fence line where he had set up a cardboard box at 30 yards, shouldered the rifle, took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the shot rolled across the empty fields behind his property and sent a flock of mourning doves up out of the pecan trees. The rifle cycled cleanly. The empty case arced over his right shoulder and landed in the grass. He fired the next round, and the next, and the next. All 8 rounds, one after another, the way the rifle had been designed to be fired almost a century ago by men who had never heard of a gun shop in a strip mall in Beaumont, Texas. When the clip ejected with the familiar high metallic ping that only a Garand makes, Raymond caught it out of the air with his left hand without looking, a reflex 56 years old, and he stood there in the cold grey light of the Texas dawn with an empty rifle in his hands and tears he had not asked for running silently down the lines of his face. The phone rang inside the house. He walked back in, the Garand still in his hand, and he picked it up. Ray. It was Harlan. His voice was different now. Formal, the way a man's voice gets when he's about to say something he has rehearsed. Ray, I need you to listen to me very carefully. That serial number you gave me last night. I ran it through 3 different people I know. I ran it through a guy at the Marine Corps Historical Division. I ran it through a buddy of mine at the CMP, and then I ran it through a third fellow whose name I'm not going to say over the phone. Harlan. That rifle was issued in June of 1967 to a private first class in the 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. It was reported lost in action on the 14th of February 1968 in the Quang Nam Province, Republic of Vietnam. Ray. The Marine it was issued to was William Hatcher. Raymond Delgado did not say anything. He sat down slowly in the kitchen chair beside the phone, and he set the rifle across his knees and he looked at it. Ray, are you still there? I'm here, Harlan. Ray, there's more? The reason I had to make those other calls last night is that the loss of that rifle is connected to a classified operation. I can't say much over the phone, but the man who led that operation, the Marine who was on that ridge with you and Hatcher that night, he's still alive. He's a retired general now, and when I called the third fellow last night and gave him that serial number, he took it straight to the general. Ray, the general is on his way to your house right now. He left Austin at 4 o'clock this morning. He should be there in about 40 minutes. Raymond set the phone down very carefully in its cradle. He walked out onto the front porch of his house, the Garand still in his hand, and he sat down in the rocking chair Elena had bought him for his 70th birthday. The sun was just coming up over the pecan trees at the edge of his property, turning the sky the pale orange colour of old fire. He thought about Billy Hatcher. He thought about the young corporal from Tulsa who had handed him a rifle on a ridge in 1968 and said, "Sarge, if anything happens, you make sure this gets home." He thought about the lieutenant they had been protecting that night, a green butter bar fresh out of Quantico named Daniel Reeves, who had been pinned down with a leg wound behind a fallen tree while the tree line around them came alive with muzzle flashes. He thought about how he had carried Lieutenant Reeves down that ridge on his back for almost 2 miles before the medevac had found them, and how Billy had stayed behind to cover their retreat, and how Billy had not come with them when they left. He thought about how, in the chaos of the extraction, he had lost Billy's rifle somewhere in the jungle, and how he had spent the next 56 years quietly believing that he had failed the one favour Billy Hatcher had asked of him in this life. And he thought about the impossible, ridiculous, beautiful fact that somehow, in a way he could not yet understand, that rifle had come home after all. 43 minutes later, a black government sedan pulled slowly into Raymond's gravel driveway. The driver's door opened, and a man in his early 70s stepped out. He was tall and trim and wore a dark civilian suit, but he carried himself the way only a lifetime in uniform teaches a man to carry himself. He walked around the front of the car and stopped at the foot of Raymond's porch steps. He looked up at the old Marine sitting in the rocking chair with the rusted Garand across his knees, and Major General Daniel Reeves, United States Marine Corps, retired, came to attention at the bottom of Raymond Delgado's porch steps and rendered a salute so sharp and so clean that it might have been cut from glass. "Staff Sergeant Delgado," he said, his voice tight with something that was not quite grief and not quite joy. "Permission to come up, Sergeant." Raymond stood slowly, the cane in his left hand and the rifle in his right, and he returned the salute the way he had been taught to return it in 1965 in a Quonset hut in San Diego. "Permission granted, Lieutenant," he said. And General Reeves, who had not been a lieutenant in 45 years, climbed the 3 wooden steps of Raymond Delgado's front porch and took the old sergeant into his arms like a son taking his father. They sat on the porch together as the sun came up the rest of the way over the pecan trees, and General Reeves told Raymond the things he had not known. He told him about the after-action investigation that had been quietly reopened in 2003, when new intelligence had surfaced about Billy Hatcher's final minutes on that ridge. He told him that Billy had not died the way the casualty report had said he had died, that Billy had held off an entire squad of North Vietnamese regulars long enough for the medevac to clear the valley, and that the citation for a posthumous Navy Cross had been sitting in a file at Headquarters Marine Corps for 21 years, while the Corps tried and failed to locate Billy's surviving family to present it. He told Raymond that the search for Billy's rifle, the serial number Raymond had read over the phone the night before, had been part of that investigation, an effort to reconstruct the physical details of the action for the commendation file, and that the rifle had been listed as unrecoverable for over half a century. And then General Reeves told Raymond the part that made the old Marine lean back in his rocking chair and close his eyes. "The property you're sitting on, Ray, this house, this land, it used to belong to a man named Samuel Hatcher, Billy's uncle. He bought it in 1971, 3 years after Billy died. He lived here until 1989, and one of the neighbours who knew him, a woman who's still alive, she's in her 90s now, I spoke to her an hour ago, she told me that Sam used to say that somewhere on this property he had buried the only thing of Billy's that ever came back from the war, a rifle. A friend of Billy's had sent it to him in the mail in 1969, with a letter that just said, 'This belongs with Billy.' Sam didn't know what to do with it. He couldn't bring himself to throw it away, and he couldn't bring himself to keep it in the house. So one day he wrapped it in oilcloth and buried it in the backyard, and he planted a pecan sapling on top of it. Ray, that pecan stump you ground out last year, that was Sam Hatcher's tree." Raymond opened his eyes and looked out across his tomato patch, and the light coming through the pecan leaves was the colour of grace. The rifle had come home, not the way anyone had planned, not through any official channel or any bureaucratic process. It had come home through a Marine named Samuel Hatcher, who had loved his nephew, and through a piece of dirt that had passed from one old man to another across the decades, and through the stubborn hands of a 78-year-old Marine who had refused to believe a 24-year-old in a polo shirt when he was told that it was scrap. General Reeves stayed for another hour. Before he left, he made one phone call from Raymond's porch, a short and quiet one, and then he turned to Raymond and said, "Ray, there's one more thing I need you to do for me. I need you to come with me to that gun shop you went to yesterday. There's a young man there who needs to learn something, and I believe you and I are the right 2 men to teach it to him. Will you do that?" Raymond looked down at the Garand across his knees. He looked up at the General, and he nodded. The bell over the door of Beaumont Firearms and Supply rang at 11:14 that morning, and Tyler Brennan looked up from his phone and felt the air in his shop change. He did not know why at first. 2 men had walked in, an older man in a faded Greenfield jacket limping slightly, carrying a long bundle wrapped in a clean white cloth, and a taller man in a dark suit, who walked a half step behind and a half step to the right, in the way a good officer walks beside the man he is escorting. Tyler recognized the older one after a moment. It was the veteran from yesterday, the one with the scrap rifle. He opened his mouth to say something pleasant and professional and found that no words came out because the man in the dark suit was looking at him with the flat, patient attention of a predator that has all day and is in no hurry whatsoever. "Good morning, son," said General Reeves. His voice was polite. His eyes were not. "My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm a retired Major General in the United States Marine Corps. The gentleman standing next to me is Staff Sergeant Raymond Delgado, also retired, United States Marine Corps, Force Reconnaissance. Staff Sergeant Delgado was awarded the Silver Star in 1968 for actions on a ridge in Quangnam Province, during which he carried me, then a wounded second lieutenant, almost 2 miles under fire to a medevac extraction point. He saved my life that night, son. I would not be standing in your store this morning if it were not for him. Now, I understand that yesterday afternoon Staff Sergeant Delgado brought a rifle into this establishment, and that you advised him to throw it in the scrap bin. Is that correct?" Tyler's face had gone the colour of old paper. The Vietnam vet in the ball cap was still standing by the ammunition shelf. He had not moved. He was watching now with the same quiet attention he had watched the day before. "Sir, I didn't know." "I'm not asking what you knew, son. I'm asking whether that is what you said, yes or no." "Yes, sir. I said that." "Thank you." The General turned to Raymond, who stepped forward and laid the bundle on the counter. He unwrapped it. The Garand gleamed dully in the fluorescent light. Clean now, the bolt oiled, the wood of the stock that Raymond had reshaped by hand in the dark hours of the morning rough but honest. "This rifle," said General Reeves quietly, "was issued in June of 1967 to Private First Class William Hatcher of Tulsa, Oklahoma, who died 4 days after his 21st birthday, holding a ridge long enough for a medevac to extract me and Staff Sergeant Delgado from a position that should have killed all 3 of us. As of this morning, that rifle has been verified by the Marine Corps Historical Division as the property of Private Hatcher and is part of an active historical record. Staff Sergeant Delgado dug it out of the ground yesterday morning. Last night, using nothing but his own hands and tools he has owned since the Vietnam War, he degreased it, cleaned it, and returned it to functional condition. At 6 o'clock this morning he fired 8 rounds through it without a single malfunction. Now, son, I have a question for you. Would you like to retract your professional assessment of yesterday?" Tyler Brennan's throat worked silently. His hands had come up to rest on the edge of the counter and they were trembling. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what it was. You didn't know what it was," General Reeves said softly, "because you didn't look. And you didn't look because you had already decided before he even finished walking through your door that an old man in a worn-out coat could not possibly have anything to teach you. Son, I have spent 45 years in the United States Marine Corps, and I have learned exactly one thing that I would like to pass along to you this morning, free of charge. The next time an old man walks into your shop with something under his arm and a quiet look on his face, you stop what you're doing, and you put down your phone, and you listen. Because 9 times out of 10, son, that old man has forgotten more about the thing in his hands than you're ever going to learn. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "Sir? Look at him when you say it. Not me. Look at Staff Sergeant Delgado." Tyler turned his face toward Raymond. His eyes were wet. "Sir, I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about the rifle, and I was wrong about everything." Raymond looked at the young man for a long quiet moment, and then, in the same low, steady voice he had used the day before, he said, "Son, it's all right. I wasn't here yesterday to be respected. I was here to see if anybody knew what they were looking at. Nobody did. That's not the end of the world. The end of the world is when a young man makes a mistake and nobody ever tells him." He reached across the counter and put one thick-knuckled hand on Tyler's forearm. The scar across the back of his hand caught the fluorescent light. "Somebody's telling you now. You listen, and you do better. That's all any of us can do." The Vietnam vet by the ammunition shelf took off his ball cap and held it over his heart. Raymond and the General walked out of Beaumont Firearms and Supply 10 minutes later. They did not take the rifle with them when they left. Raymond had made one request of General Reeves on the drive into town, and the General had agreed to it without hesitation, because it was the kind of request that only a certain kind of man would think to make. The Garand stayed behind on the counter of Tyler Brennan's gun shop. Wrapped in the clean white cloth Raymond had brought it in. Next to it, Raymond laid a single sheet of notebook paper on which he had written, in the careful block letters of a man who had filled out too many forms in his life to be sloppy about it now, the full name and service record of Private First Class William Hatcher of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the date and the place of his death, and one final line at the bottom that read, "This rifle came home. Keep it where young men can see it. Tell them who it belonged to. That is the only payment I will ever ask of you." Tyler Brennan read that piece of paper 3 times, standing alone behind his counter with the bell over the door still ringing faintly from the general's exit. And then he walked into the back office, and he took down the cheap framed print of a base boat that had been hanging on the wall above the cash register, and he carried the Garand and the piece of paper and a hammer and a nail out to the front of the shop, and he hung that rifle on the wall where every single person who walked into his store for the rest of his career would have to look at it. Underneath it, he taped Raymond's note. In the weeks that followed, word got around Beaumont the way word gets around any small Texas town, slowly at first, and then all at once. The Vietnam vet in the bullcap turned out to be a retired sheriff's deputy named Earl Briggs, and he told the story at the VFW Hall on Thursday night, and Earl's daughter told it at the beauty shop on Friday morning, and by the following Monday there was a line of people waiting outside Beaumont Firearms and Supply when Tyler Brennan unlocked the door. They came to see the rifle. They came to read the note. Some of them were veterans themselves, old men in faded caps who stood in front of the Garand without speaking, and then walked back out to their trucks with their eyes on the ground. Some of them were younger men who had never served and did not quite understand what they were looking at, but knew, by the way the older men reacted to it, that it was something they ought to pay attention to. Tyler Brennan, for his part, did not charge any of them for the looking. He stood behind his counter and he watched them come in, and every time a veteran walked through his door he set down his phone before the bell had finished ringing, and he said, "Good morning, sir. What can I do for you today?" And he listened to the answer with the kind of attention he had not known he possessed until a retired 2-star general had taught him, in about 90 seconds on a Tuesday morning, how to find it. Raymond Delgado went back to his garden. He planted a second row of tomatoes in the spring, right next to the spot where he had dug up the Garand, and he put a small wooden marker at the head of the row with a single name carved into it in the block letters of a man who had filled out too many forms to be sloppy about it. Billy Hatcher. He tended that row with particular care. The general came to visit him twice a month after that, driving down from Austin in the black sedan, and the 2 old Marines would sit on the porch together in the rocking chairs Elena had picked out, and they would drink black coffee and talk about things only they understood, and sometimes they would not talk at all. In the spring, General Reeves drove Raymond to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where they located the one surviving member of Billy Hatcher's family, a great niece named Carolyn who worked as a nurse at a children's hospital, and who had never met her great-uncle Billy but had grown up hearing his name spoken in the quiet, reverent tones her grandfather had used until the day he died, in a small ceremony in the chapel of the Tulsa Fifth Hospital, with Raymond Delgado standing at attention in his old field jacket, and General Reeves in his dress blues. The United States Marine Corps posthumously presented Caroline Hatcher with the Navy Cross that had been waiting in a filing cabinet at Headquarters Marine Corps for 21 years, along with a folded flag and a letter from the Commandant. Caroline wept. Raymond wept. The general did not weep because generals do not weep in public, but his jaw was set in a way that said everything his eyes would not. And on a Tuesday morning in May, 7 months after Raymond Delgado had walked into Beaumont Firearms and Supply with a rusted rifle wrapped in a pillowcase and been told to throw it in the scrap bin, a young man in a black polo shirt stood alone in his empty gun shop before the store opened, and he looked up at the Garand hanging on the wall above his cash register, and he read Raymond's note for what must have been the 1,000th time, and then Tyler Brennan straightened his collar, and he unlocked the front door of his shop, and he got ready to listen to whoever came through it. If this story moved you, do the one thing old Raymond Delgado would ask of any of us. The next time you see an old man in a faded coat carrying something heavy, stop what you're doing, put down your phone, and listen. These stories are the reason this channel exists, and we can only keep telling them with your help. If you believe that every forgotten hero deserves to have his name spoken out loud one more time, hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Billy Hatcher came home, so will the next one. Thank you for watching.